Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in the corner of the crowded banquet hall at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, watching the retirement ceremony unfold before her. The room was filled with decorated officers, their dress uniforms gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. She had been invited to honor General Raymond Clark, a man she had served under years ago during some of the most dangerous missions of her career. Sarah was 52 years old now, her dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. She wore her dress uniform with quiet pride, the rows of ribbons on her chest telling a story that few in this room could fully understand. Among those ribbons were 2 silver stars, a bronze star with Valor, and a purple heart. She had earned every single one of them in combat zones that most people only saw on the evening news. The ceremony was winding down. General Clark had given his speech, thanking his family and the soldiers he had commanded over 3 decades of service. Now the formal part of the evening was over, and the crowd had broken into smaller groups, laughing and sharing stories over glasses of champagne and plates of expensive food. Sarah felt out of place. She always did at these events. She was more comfortable in the field, leading soldiers, making split-second decisions that saved lives. Small talk and socializing had never been her strength. She was about to slip out early when she heard a loud voice behind her. Well, 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 look who decided to show up. Sarah turned around. Commander Jake Peterson stood there with 3 of his SEAL team buddies. All 4 men were younger than her, probably in their late 30s. Peterson had a reputation in the special operations community. He was skilled, there was no doubt about that. But he was also known for his massive ego and his old-fashioned views about women in combat roles. "Commander Peterson," Sarah said with a polite nod. She had met him twice before at similar events. Both times, he had made it clear that he did not think women belonged in special operations. "I heard you were here," Peterson said, stepping closer. His friends formed a semicircle behind him, grinning like they were about to watch a show. Couldn't believe it at first, thought maybe someone made a mistake on the guest list. Sarah kept her expression neutral. "General Clark invited me personally. We served together in Afghanistan." "Oh, I know all about that," Peterson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He was speaking loud enough now that people nearby were starting to turn and look. "I heard the stories. How you supposedly led some big rescue mission, saved a whole convoy from an ambush. Very impressive. On paper, anyway." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "I did my job, Commander, just like every other soldier there that day." "Your job," Peterson repeated, shaking his head. He took a sip of his drink and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "See, that is what I have trouble with. Women playing soldier. Getting medals for doing what any real operator does on a regular Tuesday. But I guess the Army has to hand out participation trophies these days, right, boys?" His friends laughed. The sound echoed in Sarah's ears. She could feel dozens of eyes on them now. The conversations around them had gone quiet. People were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Colonel Marcus Webb, a man Sarah had known for 15 years, started to move toward them. He looked angry, but Sarah caught his eye and gave a small shake of her head. She could handle this herself. "Commander Peterson," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "I understand you have your opinions about women in combat. You have made those opinions very clear over the years. But this is General Clark's retirement ceremony. This is not the time or place for this conversation." "Oh, I think it is exactly the time and place," Peterson said. He was enjoying himself now, feeding off the attention. "Because people need to know the truth. They need to know that half the medals given out these days are just for show. Political correctness run wild, making heroes out of people who would not last 5 minutes in a real firefight." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She had been insulted before. She had dealt with men like Peterson her entire career. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was because she was tired. Maybe it was because after 30 years of service, after all the blood and sacrifice and nights lying awake remembering the faces of soldiers she could not save, she had simply had enough. "Commander," she said quietly, "you do not know anything about me. You do not know what I have done or what I have sacrificed. You do not know the missions I have led or the soldiers I have brought home alive, so I would suggest you stop talking before you embarrass yourself." Peterson laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. "Embarrass myself? Lady, you are the embarrassment. You and every other woman who thinks putting on a uniform makes her a warrior. You want to know what I think? I think they gave you those medals because you are a woman. I think they needed some good publicity. I think you rode a desk most of your career and somehow ended up with a chest full of ribbons you did not earn." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Sarah could see the shock on people's faces. Several officers looked like they wanted to intervene, but no one moved. They were all frozen, watching this unfold like a car accident in slow motion. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about walking away. She thought about reporting Peterson to his commanding officer. She thought about 100 different responses, but before she could say anything, a new voice cut through the silence. "Commander Peterson." The voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Everyone in the room recognized it immediately. General Clark walked toward them, his footsteps measured and deliberate. His retirement ceremony had just ended, but he looked like a man ready for battle. His face was set in hard lines, his eyes locked on Peterson. "General," Peterson said, straightening up. Some of his confidence seemed to drain away. "Sir, I was just—" "Be quiet," General Clark said. It was not a shout. It was something much more dangerous. It was the voice of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers, who had made life and death decisions, who would not tolerate disrespect toward one of his own. General Clark stopped directly in front of Sarah. For a moment, she thought he was angry with her, but then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He saluted her. It was a crisp, formal salute, the kind of salute junior officers give to their superiors, the kind of salute that showed ultimate respect. Sarah, confused but following protocol, returned the salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell," General Clark said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is an honor to have you here tonight, an honor and a privilege." Before anyone could react, something else happened. The doors at the far end of the banquet hall opened. 4 men walked in, moving together with the synchronized precision that only comes from years of military service. They were all wearing dress uniforms. They were all wearing stars on their shoulders. 4 generals, 3 Army, 1 Marine. They walked straight toward Sarah, their faces serious and purposeful. The crowd parted before them like water. No one spoke. No one moved. The generals reached Sarah and stopped. Then, in perfect unison, they came to attention and saluted her. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. She recognized all 4 men. She had served with them at different points in her career. She had saved the life of one of them in Fallujah. She had planned missions with another in Kandahar. She had trained alongside the 3rd at Fort Benning. She returned their salute, her hand trembling slightly. Commander Peterson had gone pale. His friends had backed away from him, suddenly very interested in the floor. The entire room was staring, trying to understand what they were witnessing. General Clark turned to face Peterson. His voice was cold as ice. "Commander, you just insulted one of the most decorated combat officers in the United States military. You questioned her service. You questioned her medals. You suggested she did not earn her place here." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Would you like to know what Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell really did to earn those ribbons on her chest?" Peterson said nothing. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "I thought not," General Clark said. "But I am going to tell you anyway, and I am going to tell everyone else in this room, because clearly some people have forgotten what real service looks like." Sarah wanted to stop him. She had never liked being the center of attention. She had never wanted recognition for doing her job. But General Clark had already begun to speak, and she knew better than to interrupt a general when he had something to say. "Operation Desert Fury," General Clark began. "February 2007. Does anyone here remember that name?" A few people nodded. Sarah closed her eyes. She had not thought about that operation in years. Or rather, she had tried not to think about it. It still visited her in dreams sometimes, the smell of burning fuel and blood, the sound of screaming. Then you remember that it was one of the worst disasters of the Iraq War, General Clark continued. An entire convoy ambushed outside Ramadi, 40 soldiers pinned down by insurgent fire, air support delayed by sandstorms. Command thought we were going to lose every single one of them. He turned to look at Sarah. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was 30 miles away, leading a different mission. She heard the distress call. Command ordered her to stand down to wait for backup. The situation was too hot, too dangerous. A suicide mission to try and reach them. The room was silent, hanging on every word. She disobeyed that order, General Clark said. She took her unit and drove straight into hell to save those soldiers. She led the assault that broke through the ambush. She personally carried 3 wounded men to safety while under fire. She held that position for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. 37 soldiers came home alive because of her. Sarah remembered that day with painful clarity. She remembered the heat, the fear, the weight of wounded men on her shoulders. She remembered the faces of the 3 who did not make it. She could still see them sometimes when she closed her eyes. "So, Commander Peterson," General Clark said, his voice sharp as a blade. "When you question whether Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell earned her medals, you are questioning the judgment of everyone in this room who has seen real combat. You are questioning the 37 soldiers who owe their lives to her. You are questioning me." Peterson opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say. One of the other generals, a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Permission to speak, General Clark?" he asked. "Granted, General Morrison." "I would like to add something," Morrison said. He turned to address the crowd. "I was one of the soldiers in that convoy. I was a major then. I had a piece of shrapnel in my leg and was pinned behind a burning Humvee. I watched 3 of my men die in front of me. I thought I was next." He looked at Sarah, and his eyes were bright with emotion. "Then Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel. She pulled me out. She saved my life. I would not be standing here today if not for her." He turned back to Peterson. "So when you insult her, Commander, you insult every soldier she has ever saved. You insult every life she has risked her own to protect, and I will not stand for that." The 3rd general, a shorter man with a stern face, spoke next. "Operation Mountain Storm, Afghanistan, 2011. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell led a team to rescue hostages from a Taliban compound. She was shot twice, but refused to be evacuated until every hostage was safe. 6 civilians came home because of her. One of them was a 9-year-old girl named Amira." The 4th general, the Marine, cleared his throat. "Fallujah, 2004. I was a captain. Lieutenant Mitchell was Army liaison to my unit. She provided cover fire while we extracted wounded Marines from a building under siege. She held off enemy fighters for 45 minutes, alone, because the rest of her team had been ordered to pull back and she refused to leave us." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. She had spent 30 years trying to be strong, trying to prove she deserved to be there, trying to be as good as or better than every man around her. She had never asked for recognition. She had never wanted anyone to make a fuss. She had just done her job, the same job as any other soldier. But hearing these men recount these moments, hearing them speak with such respect and gratitude, something inside her finally began to soften. General Clark looked around the room. "I could stand here all night and list Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's accomplishments," he said. "Her missions, her medals, her acts of heroism. But I will not do that because she would not want me to. She has never sought glory. She has never bragged about what she has done. She has simply served with honor, courage, and distinction for 30 years. He turned back to Peterson, and his voice became ice cold again. "You owe her an apology, Commander. A sincere one. And then you owe one to every person in this room who witnessed your shameful display." Peterson stood there, his face red, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse. But then he seemed to realize that every eye in the room was on him, that his career might very well depend on what he said next. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell," he said, his voice tight. "I apologize, I spoke out of turn, I was wrong." It was not sincere. Sarah could hear the resentment in his voice, but it was something. "Apology accepted," she said quietly, because she was tired of fighting, tired of always having to prove herself, tired of men like Peterson who would never see her as anything but an intruder in their world. "That is not good enough," General Clark said. "Commander Peterson, you are dismissed from this ceremony. Get out." Peterson's face went from red to white. "Sir, That was not a suggestion. Leave, now." Peterson looked around, maybe hoping someone would come to his defense. But he found no allies in that room. His own friends had moved away from him, distancing themselves from his disgrace. After a long moment, he turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps loud in the silent room. As soon as he was gone, the tension broke. People began to move again, to breathe again. Several officers approached Sarah to shake her hand, to thank her for her service, to apologize for Peterson's behavior. But Sarah barely heard them. She was looking at General Clark and the 4 generals who had stood up for her. These men, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, had put their reputations on the line to defend her honor. "Thank you," she said softly. "All of you, you did not have to do that." "Yes, we did," General Morrison said. "Some things are more important than politics or protocol. Respect is one of them, truth is another." General Clark smiled at her. It was the first time she had seen him smile all evening. "Sarah, you have been fighting battles your entire career. Battles against the enemy. Battles against prejudice. Battles against men who think they are better than you just because they were born male. I think it is time someone fought for you for a change." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The party resumed, but it was different now. People looked at Sarah with new eyes. They saw not just a female officer, not just someone who had checked a box for diversity, but a warrior, a leader, a hero. But as Sarah stood there, surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight. Peterson had been humiliated, but men like him did not forget humiliation. They nursed it. They fed it. They turned it into something darker. She had made an enemy tonight, a dangerous one. And somewhere deep in her gut, Sarah knew this was not over. Not by a long shot. Part 2, the investigation. 3 weeks after the retirement ceremony, Sarah was back at her duty station at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, trying to forget the incident with Commander Peterson. She had received dozens of messages of support from fellow officers, but she had also received a few anonymous emails that made her skin crawl. Messages calling her names, saying she had played the victim, saying she had embarrassed Peterson on purpose to advance her career. She deleted them all without responding. She had learned long ago not to feed the trolls. It was a Tuesday morning in early December when Colonel Marcus Webb knocked on her office door. Sarah looked up from the training reports she had been reviewing. "Come in, Marcus." Webb entered, closing the door behind him. He was a big man, 6'3", with broad shoulders and hands like baseball mitts. He had been in the Army for 28 years and was one of Sarah's closest friends. They had served together in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen other places that never made the news. "We have a problem," Webb said without preamble. Sarah set down her pen. "What kind of problem?" "The Peterson kind." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What did he do?" "He filed a formal complaint against you. Against General Clark, too. And the 4 generals who stood up for you at the ceremony." Sarah stared at him. "He did what?" Webb pulled out a folder from under his arm and placed it on her desk. "It gets worse. He is claiming you fabricated your service record. He is saying the whole thing at the ceremony was staged. That you have friends in high places who have been covering for you your entire career. He has requested a full investigation into your conduct and your medals." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the gut. She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of official documents. Peterson's complaint was 20 pages long, full of accusations and insinuations. He claimed Sarah had never actually led the rescue mission in Ramadi, that she had exaggerated her role in Afghanistan, that her medals were the result of political pressure to promote more women in combat roles. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "Every word of this is a lie." I know that, you know that. But he filed it through official channels. The army has to investigate now. They have no choice. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time in years, Webb saw fear in her eyes. Marcus, if they investigate me, they will dig into everything. Every mission, every report. They will interview every soldier I ever served with. Even if they clear me, which they will, my reputation will be destroyed. People will always wonder. They will always think maybe there was some truth to Peterson's accusations. Webb nodded grimly. That is what he is counting on. He cannot beat you in a fair fight, so he is trying to destroy you through bureaucracy and innuendo. Sarah closed the folder. Her hands were shaking, and she hated herself for it. She had faced enemy fire without flinching. She had made impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. But this attack on her honor, on everything she had built over 30 years, this was different. This cut deeper than any bullet. Who is handling the investigation? She asked. That is the one piece of good news. General Stephanie Vaughn is overseeing it personally. Sarah felt a small measure of relief. General Vaughn was known throughout the military as fair-minded and thorough. She was also a woman who had faced her own battles against prejudice in her rise through the ranks. If anyone would give Sarah a fair shake, it would be her. When does it start? Today. General Vaughn wants to see you at 1400 hours. Sarah glanced at the clock on her wall. That gave her 3 hours. Okay, she said, forcing herself to sound calm. Okay, I will be ready. Webb stood up, but he paused at the door. Sarah, you know this is garbage, right? You know that everyone who matters knows what you have really done. I know, Sarah said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. After Webb left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at the wall. On that wall were photographs. Her with her unit in Iraq. Her receiving her Silver Star. Her with General Clark after they had completed a classified mission in Syria. Pictures of soldiers she had served with, some of whom had not made it home. She thought about those soldiers now. The ones she had saved, and the ones she could not save. She thought about the young army specialist she had carried out of a burning building in Mosul. She thought about the sergeant who had taken a bullet meant for her in Kandahar and survived to tell the story at her promotion ceremony. She thought about all the letters she had received over the years from soldiers and their families, thanking her for bringing their loved ones home alive. Those were the moments that mattered. Those were the reasons she wore the uniform. But would any of that matter if the investigation dragged her name through the mud? At 1400 hours exactly, Sarah reported to General Vaughn's temporary office on base. The general was in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She gestured for Sarah to sit. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, thank you for coming. Ma'am. General Vaughn opened a file on her desk. Sarah recognized it as the complaint Peterson had filed. I am sure Colonel Webb has briefed you on the situation, Vaughn said. Commander Peterson has made serious allegations against you. Allegations that, if true, would constitute fraud, dereliction of duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer. They are not true, ma'am. I know they are not true, Vaughn said, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. I have spent the last 3 weeks reading your complete service record. I have reviewed every mission report, every medal citation, every performance evaluation. I have spoken with a dozen officers who served with you over the years. Your record is not just clean, Lieutenant Colonel. It is extraordinary. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Then, why are we here, ma'am? Because Peterson knows how to work the system. He filed his complaint through the proper channels. He dotted every I and crossed every T. He even got 2 of his SEAL teammates to sign affidavits supporting his claims. Never mind that those teammates were not present at any of the events in question. Never mind that they are basing their statements entirely on Peterson's word. Vaughn closed the file and leaned back in her chair. The truth is, Lieutenant Colonel, this investigation is going to happen whether I want it to or not. The Inspector General's office is getting involved. There will be interviews. There will be depositions. It is going to be long, it is going to be unpleasant, and the press is going to have a field day with it. The press, Sarah felt sick. Peterson made sure of that. He leaked the complaint to a military blog that has connections to several major news outlets. By tonight, this story will be everywhere. Female officer accused of fabricating heroic service record. It is too juicy for them to pass up. Sarah closed her eyes. Her career was about to become a circus. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, reduced to clickbait headlines and comment section arguments. However, Vaughn continued, and Sarah opened her eyes again. Peterson made a mistake, a big one. What mistake? Vaughn smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just spotted prey. He got greedy. He did not just accuse you of fabricating your record. He accused General Clark and the 4 generals who defended you of conspiracy. He claimed they knowingly supported false information about your service in order to promote a political agenda. Sarah frowned. I do not understand. How is that a mistake? Because those 5 generals have friends, Lieutenant Colonel, very powerful friends, and those friends do not like seeing their people accused of lying. Peterson thought he was just attacking you. He thought if he made it look like a conspiracy, it would be more believable. Instead, he declared war on some of the most respected officers in the United States military. Vaughn opened another folder. This one was much thicker. In the 3 weeks since that ceremony, some very interesting information has come to light about Commander Peterson. Information that raises questions about his own conduct and his motivations for attacking you. She slid several documents across the desk. Sarah picked them up and began to read. The first was a report from Peterson's commanding officer, written 6 months ago. It detailed an incident where Peterson had been reprimanded for inappropriate comments about female officers during a training exercise. The report noted that this was not the first time Peterson had been spoken to about his attitude toward women in the military. The second document was a sworn statement from a female Navy ensign. She described how Peterson had harassed her at a military social event 2 years ago, making crude comments about her appearance and her abilities. She had filed a complaint, but it had been dismissed for lack of evidence. The third document was the most damning. It was a text message thread between Peterson and one of his SEAL teammates, dated the night of General Clark's retirement ceremony. In the messages, Peterson bragged about humiliating Sarah. He said he hoped she would break down and cry in front of everyone. He said women like her needed to be put in their place. Then, in a message sent the morning after the ceremony, Peterson wrote, "The witch made me look like a fool in front of everyone. She is going to pay for that. I am going to destroy her career the same way she destroyed my reputation." Sarah looked up at General Vaughn, her hands shaking with anger now instead of fear. "Where did you get these?" "Let us just say that when you attack generals, those generals tend to fight back, and they have resources that most people do not." Sarah read through the documents again. Each one painted a picture of a man with a deep-seated prejudice against women. A man who had been waiting for an excuse to lash out. A man whose ego could not handle being corrected in public. "This proves his complaint is retaliation," Sarah said. "This proves he is lying." "It does," Vaughn agreed. "But here is where things get complicated. Just because Peterson has ulterior motives does not automatically mean his specific allegations are false. We still have to investigate. We still have to prove, beyond any doubt, that your service record is accurate. Because if we do not, if we just dismiss his complaint based on his bad character, it will look like a cover-up. It will give ammunition to every person who wants to believe that the military protects its own at the expense of the truth." Sarah understood. The Army could not just sweep this under the rug, even though Peterson was clearly acting out of spite. They had to be transparent. They had to be thorough. They had to prove Sarah's innocence so completely that no one could ever question it again. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "Everything," Vaughn said. "I need you to provide documentation for every mission Peterson has questioned. I need names of soldiers who served with you. I need witnesses who can testify to your actions. I need to be able to reconstruct every single day of the operations he has challenged." "That is going to take time." "We have time. Or rather, we are going to make time. I am giving you 2 weeks to prepare your defense. I am also assigning you legal counsel. Captain Jennifer Hayes, JAG Corps. She is one of the best military lawyers in the country. She will help you build your case." Sarah nodded. 2 weeks. 14 days to prove that 30 years of service, 30 years of sacrifice were real and true and earned. "There is one more thing," Vaughn said. "And this is important. While this investigation is ongoing, you need to maintain your normal duties. You need to show that you are not hiding, not running, not afraid. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because a lot of people are watching you right now, Lieutenant Colonel. A lot of people who are wondering if you are everything your supporters say you are, or if Peterson might have a point. You need to show them who you really are, not through words, through actions." Sarah stood up and saluted. Vaughn returned the salute. As Sarah turned to leave, Vaughn called after her. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am." "Peterson is going to regret starting this fight. I'm going to make sure of that." Sarah managed a small smile. "With respect, ma'am, I think a lot of people are already making sure of that." That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment off base, her laptop open in front of her. Just as General Vaughn had predicted, the story had broken. Military news websites were running with headlines like "Decorated Female Officer Under Investigation" and questions raised about combat medals. The comment sections were exactly what she had expected. Half the comments were supportive, praising her service and condemning Peterson for his sexism. The other half were vicious, calling her a fraud, saying she was proof that women could not handle combat roles, claiming this was what happened when political correctness infected the military. Sarah forced herself to read through them to see what she was up against. It hurt. Every cruel word, every baseless accusation, every suggestion that she had somehow cheated her way to her rank and her medals, it all hurt more than she wanted to admit. But then she remembered something General Morrison had said to her at the retirement ceremony, after everything had settled down. He had pulled her aside and told her a story. When he was a young lieutenant, fresh out of West Point, he had served under a colonel who had taught him a valuable lesson. The colonel said, "The people who matter will always know the truth. The people who do not matter will believe whatever they want to believe. Your job is not to convince the second group. Your job is to never let down the first group. The people who matter will always know the truth." Sarah closed her laptop. She had work to do. She had documents to gather, witnesses to contact, a defense to build. She had 14 days to prove what she already knew in her heart, that she had earned every ribbon on her chest, every promotion she had received, every ounce of respect she had gained. And when this was over, when she had been vindicated, she was going to make sure that Commander Jake Peterson understood exactly who he had tried to destroy. Because Sarah Mitchell had not spent 30 years becoming one of the most respected officers in the Army by backing down from a fight, and she was not about to start now. Part 3, The Truth Comes Out. Captain Jennifer Hayes turned out to be exactly what Sarah needed. She was 38 years old, sharp as a knife, and had spent 12 years in the JAG Corps handling some of the military's most complex legal cases. She arrived at Fort Campbell 2 days after Sarah's meeting with General Vaughn, carrying 3 large briefcases and wearing an expression of focused determination. They met in a secure conference room that had been set aside for preparing Sarah's defense. Hayes spread documents across the table like a general planning a battle. "Okay," Hayes said, pulling out a legal pad. "Let us start from the beginning. Operation Desert Fury, Ramadi, 2007. Peterson claims you were not the officer who led the rescue. He claims you were actually back at base and that you took credit for someone else's actions. Let us prove him wrong." Over the next 10 days, Sarah and Hayes worked 16-hour days. They pulled every mission report, every radio transcript, every piece of documentation from Sarah's service record. They contacted soldiers who had served with her, officers who had commanded her, even Iraqi civilians who had witnessed her actions. The picture that emerged was overwhelming. Sarah had not exaggerated her service. If anything, she had downplayed it. Lieutenant James Rodriguez, now a captain stationed in Germany, provided a sworn statement about Operation Desert Fury. He had been a private in that ambushed convoy, trapped behind an overturned Humvee with a bullet wound in his shoulder. He described in detail how Sarah had appeared through the smoke, how she had personally laid down suppressing fire while her team pulled wounded soldiers to safety, how she had refused to leave until every single survivor had been evacuated. "Lieutenant Mitchell saved my life," Rodriguez wrote in his statement. "I watched her take command of a chaotic situation and turn it around. She was fearless. She was brilliant. She was everything a leader should be. Anyone who says she was not there, anyone who says she did not do what she did, is either a liar or a fool." Major General Morrison, one of the generals who had stood up for Sarah at the retirement ceremony, went even further. He provided not just his own testimony, but helped track down 8 other soldiers from that convoy. All 8 gave statements supporting Sarah's account. Several of them still had photographs from that day, including one that showed Sarah, covered in dust and blood, helping to carry a wounded sergeant to a medevac helicopter. But it was the radio transcripts that sealed the case. Every military operation is recorded. Every radio communication is logged and archived. Hayes obtained the complete audio recordings from Operation Desert Fury. Sarah listened to them in the conference room, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She heard her own voice from 18 years ago, younger but calm under pressure, directing her team, calling for air support, coordinating with the ambushed convoy. There was no doubt, no room for argument. She had been there. She had led the mission. The evidence was irrefutable. They built similar cases for every other operation Peterson had questioned. For Afghanistan, they found helmet camera footage from one of Sarah's team members showing her leading an assault on a Taliban compound. For Fallujah, they had Marine Corps reports that specifically named Sarah as the Army liaison who had provided covering fire during the extraction. "This is good," Hayes said on the 8th day, reviewing their compiled evidence. "This is very good, but we need to do more than just prove you are telling the truth. We need to show why Peterson is lying." "We already know why," Sarah said tiredly. "He is a sexist who could not handle being called out." "That is part of it," Hayes agreed. "But I think there is more. I have been digging into Peterson's service record, and I found something interesting." She pulled out another file. Peterson was recommended for a Medal of Honor 3 years ago, a mission in Syria where he allegedly rescued hostages from an ISIS compound. The recommendation went all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy, but it was denied. Sarah frowned. "Why?" "That is where it gets murky. The official reason was that there was insufficient evidence to support the claims of extraordinary heroism, but I talked to someone in Naval Special Warfare Command. Off the record, they told me that there were questions about Peterson's account of the mission. Some of his own team members contradicted his version of events. They said Peterson had exaggerated his role, that he had claimed to do things that other operators had actually done." Sarah leaned forward. "So he accused me of doing exactly what he himself did." "Looks like it. And here is the kicker. One of the officers who reviewed Peterson's Medal of Honor recommendation and raised concerns about its accuracy was General Clark." Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. Now it made sense. Peterson's hatred of her was not just about sexism, though that was certainly part of it. It was personal. He blamed General Clark for denying him the medal he thought he deserved. When he saw Sarah being honored at Clark's retirement ceremony, when he saw Clark and the other generals defending her, it must have felt like salt in an old wound. "He is projecting," Sarah said quietly. "He is accusing me of fabricating my record because that is what he did. He is trying to destroy my reputation because he thinks we destroyed his." "Exactly," Hayes said. "And when General Vaughn presents this information during the investigation, it is going to blow Peterson's credibility out of the water." But even with all their evidence, Sarah knew the investigation would still be grueling. The Inspector General's office was conducting interviews with everyone involved. Sarah herself was questioned for 3 days straight, going over every detail of her service, answering the same questions in different ways, being challenged and cross-examined as if she were on trial. It was exhausting and humiliating, but Sarah endured it. She answered every question truthfully and completely. She provided every piece of evidence requested. She did not lose her temper, did not break down, did not give them any reason to doubt her. Meanwhile, Peterson was facing his own reckoning. News of his past reprimands for sexist behavior had leaked to the press. The text messages where he had threatened to destroy Sarah's career had been made public. The questions about his own Medal of Honor recommendation had surfaced. Public opinion was turning against him. Even some of the people who had initially defended him, who had suggested Sarah might be exaggerating her service, were backing away. It was becoming clear that Peterson was not a truth-teller exposing fraud. He was a bitter man lashing out at someone he saw as a threat. On the 14th day, General Vaughn called Sarah and Hayes to her office. "The preliminary investigation is complete," Vaughn said. "The Inspector General will issue their final report in 3 days, but I have seen the draft. I can tell you now, you are cleared, Lieutenant Colonel, completely and unequivocally." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them back. "The investigation found no evidence to support any of Peterson's allegations," Vaughn continued. "In fact, the evidence overwhelmingly confirms that your service record is accurate in every detail. The Inspector General is recommending that no further action be taken regarding your conduct." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah managed to say. "However," Vaughn said, and her expression grew hard, "the investigation did find evidence of misconduct by Commander Peterson, making false official statements, filing a fraudulent complaint, conduct unbecoming an officer. The Naval Special Warfare Command is convening a board of inquiry to review his actions. He will almost certainly face disciplinary measures. His career is effectively over." Sarah should have felt satisfaction at that, but instead, she just felt tired. Tired of the fight, tired of always having to prove herself, tired of men like Peterson who would rather tear others down than build themselves up. "There is one more thing," Vaughn said. "A good thing this time. The Army wants to formally recognize your service. There is talk of a ceremony, new commendations, possibly even promoting you to full colonel ahead of schedule." Sarah shook her head. "With respect, ma'am, I do not want any of that. I just want to go back to my unit and do my job." Vaughn studied her for a moment. "I understand, but you should know that what happened here matters, not just for you, but for every woman serving in uniform. You stood up to someone who tried to destroy you. You proved that merit and truth still matter. That is worth recognizing." Maybe it was, but right now, Sarah just wanted to put this whole nightmare behind her. The Inspector General's report was released 3 days later. It was 80 pages long and left no doubt about Sarah's integrity or the accuracy of her service record. The press coverage was extensive. Headlines now read, "Female Officer Vindicated in False Accusations Case," and "Navy SEAL Faces Discipline After Fraudulent Complaint." Sarah received hundreds of messages of support. Fellow officers, soldiers she had served with, even some people she had never met reached out to congratulate her and thank her for standing strong. But there was one message that meant more to her than all the others combined. It came from Specialist Daniel Chen, a young soldier she had pulled from a collapsed building in Mosul 12 years ago. Chen was out of the Army now, working as a high school teacher in Oregon. His email was short and simple. "Ma'am, I saw what that SEAL tried to do to you. I want you to know that everyone who served with you knows the truth. You saved my life. You saved a lot of lives. That man tried to take away your honor, but he could not do it because your honor is not something that can be given or taken away by words. It is something you earned through actions, through sacrifice, through being there when people needed you most. I hope you know how many of us out here are grateful for your service. How many of us are better people because we had the privilege of serving under your command." Sarah read that email 3 times, and by the 3rd time she was crying. These were the people who mattered, the soldiers she had served with, the lives she had saved, the officers who knew what she had really done in those dark places where the cameras never went. Commander Peterson had tried to destroy her with lies, but the truth was stronger than lies. The truth always was. 2 weeks after the investigation concluded, Sarah was working in her office when Colonel Webb knocked on her door. "You have a visitor," he said. General Clark walked in. Sarah stood up, surprised. She had not seen him since the retirement ceremony. "Sir, I did not know you were on base." "I am not officially," Clark said with a smile. "I am retired, remember, but I heard the investigation wrapped up. I wanted to come thank you in person." "Thank me? Sir, I should be thanking you. If you had not stood up for me that night." "You would have handled it yourself," Clark interrupted. "The same way you have handled every other challenge in your career, with dignity, courage, and integrity. I just sped up the process." He sat down across from her desk. "Sarah, I want you to know something. When I recommended you for your first Silver Star, there were people who questioned it. They said I was being too generous. They said you were good, but not that good. They suggested I was trying to make a political statement by promoting a female officer." Sarah had not known that. "I ignored them," Clark continued, "because I knew the truth. I had seen you in action. I had watched you lead soldiers through impossible situations. I had seen you make decisions that saved lives, and I knew that you were not just as good as the male officers I had commanded. You were better than most of them." He leaned forward. "That is why Peterson's accusations made me so angry. Not just because they were lies, but because they represented everything that is wrong with our military culture. This idea that women have to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. This assumption that if a woman succeeds, it must be because of politics or favoritism, never because of her own merit." "It has been that way my whole career," Sarah said quietly. "I know, and I am sorry for that. I am sorry that you have had to fight this battle over and over again, but I want you to know that it is changing. Slowly, too slowly, but it is changing. And part of that change is because of officers like you who kept going, kept proving themselves, kept refusing to give up even when it would have been easier to quit." Clark stood up. "One more thing, Peterson is done. His career is over. The Navy is processing his discharge as we speak, but there are others like him out there. Men who think like he does, who will try to do what he did. You need to be ready for that." "I am always ready, sir." Clark smiled. "Yes, you are. That is why I never worry about you." After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office for a long time, thinking about what he had said. There would be others like Peterson. There would always be people who questioned her, who doubted her, who assumed she had gotten where she was through anything except her own hard work and sacrifice. But she had survived this challenge. She had proven the truth, and she would keep proving it for as long as she wore the uniform. Because that was what soldiers did. They kept going. They kept fighting. They never gave up. Even when the enemy was prejudice. Even when the battle was for respect. Even when the war seemed endless. They kept going. And Sarah Mitchell had never been the type to give up. Part 4, The Unexpected Turn. 3 months after the investigation concluded, Sarah was finally beginning to feel like her life was returning to normal. The press had moved on to other stories. The emails from supporters and detractors alike had slowed to a trickle. She was back to focusing on what she did best, leading soldiers and preparing them for the challenges they would face in the field. It was a cold February morning when Captain Hayes called her. "Lieutenant Colonel, we need to talk. In person, today if possible." Sarah felt a familiar tension in her chest. Hayes's voice carried the same serious tone she had used during the investigation. "What is this about, Captain?" "I would rather discuss it face to face. Can you come to Washington? I am at the Pentagon this week." Sarah checked her schedule. She had training exercises planned, but nothing that could not be handled by her executive officer. "I can be there tomorrow." "Good, I will text you the details." The next day, Sarah found herself sitting in a small conference room deep in the Pentagon's maze of corridors. Hayes arrived carrying yet another thick folder, this one sealed with red tape that indicated classified materials. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Hayes said, sitting down across from Sarah. "What I am about to tell you is highly sensitive. It concerns Commander Peterson and some new information that has come to light." Sarah frowned. "I thought Peterson's case was closed. I thought he was being discharged." "It was closed, and he is being discharged. But something unexpected happened. 2 weeks ago, a Navy intelligence officer named Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos came forward. She had information about Peterson that goes beyond his false accusations against you. Hayes opened the folder and pulled out several documents. For the past 6 months, Lieutenant Commander Santos has been investigating irregularities in Special Operations mission reports. Nothing that raised red flags initially, just small inconsistencies. Different versions of the same events reported by different operators. Medals and commendations that did not quite match the supporting evidence. What does that have to do with Peterson? Everything, Hayes said. Because as Santos dug deeper, she found a pattern. And at the center of that pattern was Commander Jake Peterson and 3 other SEAL operators who were close to him. She spread out the documents. They were mission reports, medal citations, after-action reviews. All of them involved Peterson's team. Over the past 5 years, Peterson and his team have been recommended for an extraordinary number of medals and commendations, more than any other SEAL team operating in the same theaters. At first glance, it looks like they were just exceptionally good at their jobs. But Santos noticed something. In several cases, the official mission reports did not match statements given by other personnel who were present. Sarah studied the documents. You are saying they falsified reports. We are saying they exaggerated their accomplishments. They took successful missions and made themselves sound more heroic than they actually were. They claimed actions that were performed by others. They inflated enemy casualty numbers and downplayed support from other units. Hayes pulled out another document. Remember that mission in Syria? The one where Peterson was recommended for the Medal of Honor. Santos found the original mission reports. She interviewed members of Peterson's team who were willing to talk confidentially. The truth is very different from what Peterson claimed. Sarah read through the report. According to the actual evidence, the hostage rescue had been a joint operation involving multiple SEAL teams, Army Rangers, and Air Force combat controllers. Peterson had been part of the assault team, yes, but he had not single-handedly saved the hostages. He had not fought off dozens of ISIS fighters alone. He had not carried wounded hostages through enemy fire. He had done his job. He had done it well, but he had not been the hero he claimed to be. How many missions are we talking about? Sarah asked. 7 that we can prove, possibly as many as 12. Santos believes Peterson and his team have been inflating their accomplishments for years. And here is where it gets really interesting. When Peterson's Medal of Honor recommendation was being reviewed, General Clark was not the only one who raised concerns. 3 other officers flagged inconsistencies in the report, but their concerns were overruled by Peterson's direct commanding officer, Captain Richard Mercer. Hayes pulled out a photograph of a Navy captain with cold eyes and a thin smile. Captain Mercer has been protecting Peterson for years. Why? Because Peterson's team made Mercer look good. Every medal they received, every commendation, every news story about their heroic actions, it all reflected well on Mercer as their commander. He had a vested interest in Peterson's success. Sarah felt sick. So Peterson accused me of doing exactly what he had been doing all along. Worse than that, he saw you as a threat. You were a female officer with legitimate accomplishments. You were everything he pretended to be. When General Clark and the others defended you at that retirement ceremony, when they validated your service, it was like holding up a mirror to Peterson's lies. He could not stand it. What happens now? Hayes leaned back in her chair. The Navy is conducting a full investigation into Peterson's entire service record. They are reviewing every mission he was involved in, every medal he received, every commendation his team earned. It is going to be messy. Some of those medals may have to be rescinded. Some operations may have to be reclassified. And Captain Mercer is going to face serious consequences for covering up the discrepancies. And the other SEALs on Peterson's team. That is complicated. Some of them went along with Peterson's exaggerations because they benefited too. Some of them were pressured to support his versions of events, and some of them tried to tell the truth but were shut down by Peterson and Mercer. Santos is trying to sort out who did what. Sarah processed all of this. She thought about how Peterson had stood in that banquet hall and accused her of fabricating her record, how he had questioned her medals, how he had suggested she was a fraud who had been propped up by political correctness, all while he himself was the actual fraud. "There is one more thing," Hayes said quietly, "and this is the part I really needed to tell you in person. Lieutenant Commander Santos wants to talk to you." "To me? Why?" "Because you were not the first person Peterson tried to destroy. 3 years ago, a female Navy intelligence officer named Lieutenant Sarah Reeves worked with Peterson's team on a classified operation in Yemen. After the mission, Reeves raised concerns about the accuracy of Peterson's after-action report. She said he was exaggerating what happened, taking credit for intelligence work that she and her team had done." "What happened to her?" "Peterson went after her. He filed complaints about her competence. He spread rumors that she had compromised the mission. He made her life so difficult that she eventually requested a transfer to a desk job far from any special operations. She is still in the Navy, but her career never recovered." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. He has done this before. "Multiple times," Santos believes, and Reeves is willing to testify about what Peterson did to her, but she is scared. She has spent 3 years trying to forget what happened. She is worried that coming forward will just make her a target again. "What does Santos want from me?" "She wants you to talk to Reeves. She thinks if Reeves sees that someone stood up to Peterson and won, it might give her the courage to come forward. And if Reeves testifies, it will strengthen the case against Peterson significantly." Sarah did not hesitate. "Set up the meeting." 2 days later, Sarah found herself in a coffee shop in Norfolk, Virginia, waiting for Lieutenant Sarah Reeves. When Reeves walked in, Sarah saw a woman who looked haunted. She was in her early 30s, thin, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that suggested she did not sleep well at night. They sat down together, and for a moment neither spoke. "I saw what he tried to do to you," Reeves finally said. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "I saw the news reports. I saw how he accused you of lying, and I thought that is exactly what he did to me, except I did not have generals standing up for me. I did not have anyone who believed me over him." "I believe you," Sarah said simply. Reeves looked up, and Sarah saw tears in her eyes. "You do not know what it was like. He was a war hero. He had all these medals. Everyone loved him. And I was just an intelligence officer who was questioning his version of events. When I filed my complaint, his commanding officer dismissed it immediately. Then Peterson started spreading lies about me. He said I was incompetent. He said I was jealous of his success. He said I was trying to destroy his reputation because I wanted attention." It was Sarah's story all over again. The same tactics, the same lies, the same abuse of power. "He destroyed my career," Reeves continued. "I had to transfer out of intelligence work. I spent 3 years in a personnel office, pushing papers, watching my classmates get promoted while I stagnated, all because I told the truth about what really happened in Yemen." "That was not your fault," Sarah said firmly. "That was on him. He was the one who lied. He was the one who abused his position. You were just doing your job." "But I let him win. I gave up. I stopped fighting." "You survived," Sarah corrected. "You protected yourself the only way you could. That is not giving up. That is making the best choice available at the time." Reeves wiped her eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Santos says if I testify about what Peterson did to me, it will help prove a pattern of behavior. It will show that he has been doing this for years, not just to you, but to anyone who threatened his image." "That is true. But I am scared. What if they do not believe me again? What if Peterson's friends come after me? What if this destroys what is left of my career?" Sarah reached across the table and took Reeves's hand. "Listen to me. I was scared too. When Peterson accused me, when that investigation started, I was terrified. I thought even if I was cleared, the doubt would follow me forever. I thought people would always wonder if maybe he was right. But you fought anyway." "I fought because I had to. Because if I did not, then everything I had done, all the soldiers I had saved, all the missions I had led, none of it would matter. He would have taken it all away with his lies." Sarah squeezed Reeves's hand. But I did not fight alone. I had people supporting me, generals who stood up for me, soldiers who testified on my behalf, a lawyer who helped me gather evidence. And now I am here to support you. If you decide to testify, I will stand with you. I will make sure your story is heard. I will make sure they believe you this time. Reeves was crying openly now. I have been so angry for so long, angry at Peterson, angry at his commanding officer, angry at the system that protected him and threw me away, angry at myself for not fighting harder. Use that anger, Sarah said. Channel it into something productive. Help bring Peterson down. Help make sure he never does this to anyone else. Reeves nodded slowly. Okay, I will do it. I will testify. Over the next month, Lieutenant Commander Santos built a case that was even more damning than anyone had anticipated. With Reeves's testimony, with the mission report Sarah's investigation had uncovered, with statements from other operators who had been pressured by Peterson, the evidence was overwhelming. Commander Jake Peterson had spent years inflating his accomplishments, taking credit for others' work, and attacking anyone who threatened to expose him. He had created an image of himself as a legendary warrior, and he had protected that image by destroying the reputations of anyone who questioned it. The Navy convened a board of inquiry. It lasted 2 weeks. Peterson tried to defend himself, but every argument he made crumbled under the weight of evidence. His teammates, the ones who had gone along with his lies, turned on him to save their own careers. Captain Mercer, his commanding officer, resigned in disgrace rather than face court-martial. And through it all, Sarah and Reeves sat in the gallery, watching justice slowly unfold. When the board finally announced its findings, they were severe. Commander Peterson was found guilty of making false official statements, conduct unbecoming an officer, and abusing his position to retaliate against subordinates. He was given a dishonorable discharge, stripped of several of his medals, and recommended for reduction in rank. His reputation, the thing he had valued more than truth, more than honor, more than the lives of the people he had hurt, was destroyed. After the hearing, Reeves found Sarah in the hallway. "Thank you," Reeves said, "for believing me, for standing with me, for showing me that it was possible to fight back." "You did the fighting," Sarah said. "I just gave you a push." "No, you did more than that. You showed me that the truth matters, that speaking up matters, that standing up to bullies like Peterson matters, even when it is scary, even when it feels impossible." Reeves smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. It was a small smile, fragile but real. "I got my transfer orders yesterday. I am going back to intelligence work, real work, the work I was trained to do. It is like I am finally getting my career back." "You deserve that," Sarah said. "You always did." As Sarah flew back to Fort Campbell that evening, she thought about everything that had happened over the past 4 months. Peterson's attack, the investigation, the discovery of his lies, the vindication. She thought about how close it had come to going the other way. If General Clark and the other generals had not stood up for her, if Captain Hayes had not been so thorough, if Sarah herself had not kept her composure and fought back with truth and evidence instead of anger. She thought about Reeves, about how Peterson had nearly destroyed her career just for telling the truth. And she thought about all the other women who might have faced similar attacks, who might have been silenced, who might have been driven out of the military by men who felt threatened by their presence. The fight was not over. It would never be over, not completely. But this was a victory, a real, meaningful victory. Peterson was gone. His lies were exposed. And Sarah Mitchell was still standing, still serving, still leading soldiers with honor and integrity. That was worth something. That was worth everything. Part 5, A New Beginning. 6 months after Commander Peterson's dishonorable discharge, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell found herself standing in front of 200 officers at the Combined Arms Center in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. She had been invited to speak about leadership, about integrity, about the importance of standing up for the truth, even when it came at great personal cost. She had almost declined the invitation. Public speaking had never been her strength. She preferred to lead by example, not by words. But General Vaughn had personally asked her to do it, explaining that her story needed to be told, that it could help change the culture of the military for the better. So here she was, looking out at an audience full of future leaders, preparing to share the most difficult months of her life. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell. 6 months ago, a fellow officer tried to destroy my career by accusing me of fabricating my service record. Today, I want to talk to you about what I learned from that experience." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. It showed her in Afghanistan, covered in dust, carrying a wounded soldier. This photograph was taken in 2011 during Operation Mountain Storm. "The soldier I am carrying is Specialist Marcus Holt. He had been shot twice while securing a building. I pulled him out because that is what leaders do. We take care of our people." She clicked to the next slide. It showed her standing with her unit, all of them smiling despite the harsh conditions. "These are some of the soldiers I have had the privilege of leading over my 30 years of service. They come from all backgrounds, all walks of life. Some of them went on to great careers. Some of them struggled after leaving the military. 2 of them did not make it home alive." Her voice caught slightly on that last sentence. She paused, took a breath, continued. "I did not save every soldier under my command. I made mistakes. I had to make impossible choices where there was no right answer, only less wrong ones. But I always tried to do my best for them. I always put their lives ahead of my own." She clicked again. This slide showed the rows of ribbons on her dress uniform. "These medals represent moments of my career. Some of them represent missions that went well. Some of them represent missions where we barely made it out alive. But every single one of them was earned through actions, not words. Through sacrifice, not politics. Through the blood and sweat of soldiers working together to accomplish impossible tasks." She clicked to a slide showing Commander Peterson. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. "6 months ago, this officer accused me of lying about my service. He said I had fabricated my record. He said my medals were given to me because I am a woman, not because I earned them. He did this publicly, in front of dozens of witnesses, at a retirement ceremony that should have been a celebration." Sarah could see people in the audience leaning forward now, fully engaged. "I was humiliated. I was angry. I wanted to shout at him to tell him exactly what I thought of his accusations, but I did not do that. Do you know why?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Because the truth does not need to shout. The truth speaks for itself if you give it time and opportunity. So instead of getting angry, I gathered evidence. I contacted witnesses. I built a case. I let the facts speak for me.